The Arizona sun dipped low on the horizon, streaking the sky with fiery hues of orange and crimson. Jack Rivers stood on the porch of his modest home, his eyes scanning the desert landscape that stretched endlessly before him. A retired Marine, Jack had seen sunsets like this on faraway battlefields, but here at home, they brought him no peace. Civilian life felt hollow, a rhythm he couldn't quite grasp. The only thing grounding him was Emily. Emily Rivers was everything Jack wasn't. She was spontaneous, curious, and had a knack for seeing beauty where others saw nothing. A photographer by trade, Emily could lose herself for hours chasing the perfect shot. Tonight, her excitement was palpable as she packed her camera gear into the Jeep. "I'm telling you, Jack," she said, her voice laced with exhilaration. "The way the light hits those mesas at sunset, it's like the desert comes alive." Jack smiled faintly. "Just don't forget we've got a long drive back tonight. Border Patrol doesn't take kindly to folks wandering too close to Mexico." Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "Relax, Mr. Marine. I'm not planning on defecting." She kissed his cheek and hopped into the driver's seat, motioning for him to join. Jack slid into the passenger side, his instincts quietly cataloging the contents of their vehicle. A half-empty water bottle, a roadside emergency kit, and a glove box with a barely legal handgun. Old habits died hard. The drive was peaceful at first. The Jeep rumbled along dirt roads, its tires kicking up plumes of dust. Emily was in her element, leaning out the window to capture shots of the stark, golden landscape. Jack kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at the GPS. But peace has a way of shattering without warning. "Stop here," Emily exclaimed, pointing to a narrow dirt path veering off the main road. "I need to get closer to those cliffs." Jack hesitated, his gut stirring with unease. "Emily, that path's not on the map." "So? It's just a detour." "Come on, Jack. Live a little." Against his better judgment, Jack relented. The Jeep bounced down the uneven trail, the terrain growing rougher with every mile. Emily eventually jumped out, camera in hand, and sprinted toward the cliffs. Jack stayed behind, leaning against the hood as he watched her frame shot after shot. He noticed the wind picking up, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't place it. That's when he saw the warning sign. A rusted metal placard riddled with bullet holes, the Spanish words barely legible.
"Peligro. Zona de cartel."
"Emily," Jack shouted, his voice sharp. She didn't hear him, too focused on her camera. Then, the sound of tires crunching gravel pierced the air. A black SUV appeared out of nowhere, its windows tinted and engine purring like a predator ready to strike. Jack's hand instinctively moved toward the Jeep's glove box, but before he could act, 3 armed men stepped out, their faces obscured by bandanas. Emily turned, startled, just as one of the men grabbed her. Her scream echoed across the cliffs, cutting through Jack like a blade. He bolted toward her, but the barrel of an assault rifle stopped him in his tracks.
"Alto ahí.
Barked one of the men.
Mueve un músculo y ella muere."
Jack froze, his fists clenched in helpless rage. "Let her go," he shouted. "She's done nothing to you." The man sneered, slamming the butt of his rifle against Jack's temple. Pain exploded in his head, and he crumpled to the ground, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Emily being shoved into the SUV, her terrified eyes meeting his. When Jack came to, the desert was silent again. The Jeep sat untouched, its doors flung open. Emily's camera lay in the dirt, the lens shattered, and Jack Rivers was alone. The world swam as Jack staggered to his feet, the sharp ache in his temple making every movement a battle. The Jeep's headlights cut eerie beams into the darkness, illuminating the emptiness where Emily had been. Her camera lay discarded like a cruel omen, its fractured lens catching the light. Jack stumbled toward the Jeep, his training screaming for him to take inventory. His phone sat on the dashboard, buzzing incessantly. Shaking off his disorientation, he answered. A voice, smooth and mocking, greeted him. "Senor Rivers, your wife has wandered where she doesn't belong." Jack's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this? Where is she?" questions, the man said with a laugh. You Americans love your questions. Let's keep it simple, see? Bring $100,000 to the town of Valle Perdido. You have 48 hours. Fail and your wife dies. Wait, Jack barked, but the line went dead. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone, the weight of the moment crashing over him. The U.S. Border Patrol office was sterile and cold, its fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over the tired faces of the officers. Jack sat across from an agent, explaining the situation with barely controlled rage. She's an American citizen. You can't just leave her out there. The agent sighed. Look, we've heard of Valle Perdido. It's cartel territory. We can notify Mexican authorities, but jurisdiction gets tricky. I don't need bureaucracy, Jack snapped. I need a team. Send men with me. That's not how this works, the agent replied, his voice steady. We can't risk an international incident. I'm sorry. Jack left the office feeling colder than when he'd arrived. His mind raced as he drove home, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. He couldn't wait for the wheels of bureaucracy to turn, not when Emily's life was on the line. At home, Jack opened a dusty footlocker at the back of the closet. Inside were relics of a life he'd tried to leave behind. Fatigues, a K-bar knife, and his battered dog tags. At the bottom lay the tools he needed most, a concealed SIG sour and a box of ammunition. He strapped on his holster, the weight of the weapon a grim comfort. The drive into Mexico felt like slipping into another world. Jack crossed the border under the cover of night, avoiding major checkpoints. His Marine training sharpened his senses, every shadow and sound scrutinized for threats. He reached a desolate border town by dawn, its streets eerily quiet. He parked the Jeep behind a dilapidated building and started asking questions, careful not to draw too much attention. A bartender in a dimly lit cantina offered the first clue, a name.
Mateo Ramírez.
He works for El Dragon, the bartender said in hushed tones. If your wife's in Valle Perdido, she's probably in his hands. Jack's jaw tightened. Where do I find him? The bartender hesitated, glancing around nervously. You don't find Mateo. He finds you. As night fell, Jack's plan began to take shape. He scouted the town's outskirts, marking potential escape routes and vantage points. He needed to send a message, one that would reach Mateo Ramirez loud and clear. At a local mechanic's garage rumored to be a cartel front, Jack moved like a phantom. He disabled security cameras and slipped inside, where 3 men lounged, playing cards. In seconds, he disarmed the first, incapacitated the second, and had the third pinned against a wall. Tell Mateo I'm coming, Jack growled. And tell him I'm bringing hell with me. By the time he left, the garage was in flames, its smoke a beacon rising into the night sky. Back at his hideout, Jack's burner phone buzzed. He answered, already knowing who it was. Impressive, Mateo's voice drawled. You've got my attention, senor. But you're playing a dangerous game. Jack's voice was ice. You've got 24 hours to release my wife, or I'll tear your operation apart piece by piece. Mateo laughed, the sound venomous. You think you're the first to try this?
Come tu Valle Perdido.
Let's see if your bark is louder than your bite. The line went dead, leaving Jack with only the promise of blood ahead. The road to Valle Perdido was a stretch of desolation, flanked by jagged hills and scrubland under a moonless sky. Jack's Jeep blended with the darkness, its engine purring as he approached the town that Cartel whispers had christened the Devil's Denver. The air felt heavier here, laden with the unseen presence of men who dealt death as casually as others handled cash. Jack parked just outside town, in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. From his vantage point, Valle Perdido looked like a ghost town. Crumbling adobe buildings, a single dusty street, and flickering lights from a central cantina. But Jack knew better. This was no ghost town. It was a viper's nest. He scanned the area with binoculars, noting movement on the rooftops, armed sentries. 2 pickup trucks with mounted machine guns idled outside the cantina, their drivers puffing on cigarettes. Jack's instincts surged to the forefront. The town wasn't just defended, it was fortified. Jack made his first move just before dawn. He approached a gas station on the outskirts, crouching low and sticking to the shadows. A lone guard leaned against a pump, his rifle slung lazily over his shoulder. Jack moved swiftly, his knife flashing in the dim light. The man crumpled soundlessly. Inside the station's office, Jack found a radio. He tuned it to the cartel's frequency, a calculated risk. Static crackled before voices filtered through, discussing shipments, patrol rotations, and, finally, a name: Emily.
Chica americana está en la hacienda. One voice said. Mateo quiere que esté lista para el traslado mañana.
The hacienda. Jack's fists tightened. He needed to find it, but first he had to draw more intel. The cantina was Jack's next stop. By mid-morning, it was a hive of activity, with men loading crates of weapons into trucks. Jack moved stealthily, using the cluttered alleyways to his advantage. He waited until one of the cartel's lieutenants, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped outside to smoke. Jack pounced, slamming the man against the wall and pressing his knife to his throat. The hacienda, he growled. Where is it? The lieutenant spat a curse, then grinned. You're already dead, gringo. You just don't know it. Jack applied more pressure, the blade nicking skin. I'm not asking twice. Reluctantly, the man caved. South of town. 2 miles. Big gates. You won't get in alive. We'll see about that, Jack muttered, knocking the man unconscious before melting back into the shadows. As Jack prepared to leave, his burner phone buzzed. Mateo Ramirez's voice came through, his tone amused. You've been busy, senor. 3 of my men dead, and you're still breathing. I'm impressed. Jack didn't respond, his silence deliberate. Mateo chuckled. You're wondering if your wife is still alive, aren't you? Don't worry. She's in good hands. For now. I'm coming for her, Jack said coldly. And when I do, you'll wish you'd killed me first. Good, Mateo replied. Come. I want to see if the stories about Marines are true. The hacienda loomed like a fortress, its high walls and wrought iron gates casting menacing shadows under the midday sun. Jack surveyed it from a ridge, noting guard patrols and cameras. His plan required precision and brutality in equal measure. He began with the power. Under cover of darkness, Jack crept toward a generator shack near the rear of the compound. A few well-placed charges took it offline, plunging the hacienda into chaos. Shouts echoed as guards scrambled to react. Using the confusion, Jack scaled the wall, his movements silent and deliberate. Inside, the compound was a labyrinth of courtyards and corridors. He moved swiftly, neutralizing guards with lethal efficiency. Jack's first confrontation with Mateo came unexpectedly. He entered a lavishly furnished room to find the cartel lieutenant waiting, flanked by 2 armed men. Emily wasn't there. Senor Rivers, Mateo greeted, clapping mockingly. You made it further than I thought. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove for cover as gunfire erupted, the deafening roar shattering the rooms. Tranquility. His Marine training took over, and within moments, both of Mateo's men were down. Mateo fled, leaving behind a trail of blood. Jack followed, his pulse a steady drumbeat of rage and focus. The chase led him deeper into the hacienda, toward a locked cell where Emily's muffled cries reached his ears. Emily, Jack called, his voice cracking. Jack, she screamed back. It's a trap. The words hit too late. Mateo appeared from the shadows, gun raised. Jack spun just in time, grappling with the cartel leader. The fight was vicious, their bodies slamming into walls and furniture. Mateo fought dirty, using every underhanded tactic, but Jack's sheer determination prevailed. He disarmed Mateo and ended the fight with brutal finality. Jack burst into Emily's cell, his heart pounding. She was bruised but alive, tears streaming down her face as she fell into his arms. I knew you'd come, she whispered. Jack didn't waste time. We're not out yet. Gunfire erupted outside as the remaining cartel forces regrouped. Jack led Emily through the chaos, using his knowledge of the compound's layout to evade capture. They reached the perimeter just as reinforcements arrived, the night exploding with the staccato of gunfire. The escape wasn't easy. Jack and Emily darted through the chaos, the hacienda's walls echoing with shouted orders and the relentless crack of gunfire. Every step felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. Jack led the way, his weapon steady as he picked off guards who strayed too close. Emily stayed close, her fear palpable but her resolve unwavering. "Down here," Jack barked, pulling her toward a tunnel hidden behind a crumbling stone wall. It was narrow and reeked of damp earth, but it led them away from the central compound. As they emerged into the moonlit desert, Jack could see the glow of headlights converging in the distance. The cartel wasn't letting them go. They reached a small plateau overlooking the hacienda. Jack knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but surrender wasn't an option. He surveyed their surroundings, his mind racing. The terrain offered some natural cover, and the scattered rocks could slow the approaching vehicles. He checked his remaining ammunition, barely enough. Then he spotted something that gave him a grim spark of hope. An old, rusted oil drum sitting by the edge of the plateau. "Emily," he said, turning to her with a calmness he didn't feel. "I need you to trust me." "I always do," she replied, her voice shaking but certain. Jack handed her his knife and motioned toward a cluster of rocks. "Stay low. No matter what happens, don't come out until I call you." "What about you?" she asked, her eyes wide. He gripped her shoulders. "I'm not leaving you, but I need to slow them down first." The cartel trucks roared up the hillside, their headlights cutting through the night like searchlights. Jack positioned himself behind a boulder, his weapon ready. He waited, his breath steady, until the first truck was close. Enough. Then he fired, taking out the driver with a single shot. The vehicle swerved wildly before crashing into the rocks. The other trucks screeched to a halt, their occupants spilling out in a storm of gunfire. Jack moved methodically, his marine training turning the chaos into calculated action. He used the terrain to his advantage, picking off the gunmen one by one. But the cartel's numbers were overwhelming. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him, and Jack knew he couldn't hold them forever. He reached into his pack, pulling out the last of his explosives. Crawling to the oil drum, he planted the charges with swift, practiced movements. Mateo's second-in-command, a hulking figure known as El Toro, emerged from one of the trucks. His deep voice boomed across the plateau. "Rivers, you think you can escape El Dragon's wrath? Surrender now and we'll make your death quick." Jack stepped out from behind the boulder, his weapon lowered but his stance unyielding. "You think I came here to escape?" El Toro's men hesitated, unsure of the lone man facing them. Jack's voice cut through the night like a blade. "I came here to finish this." Jack's thumb pressed the detonator, and the oil drum erupted in a fiery explosion. The blast engulfed one of the trucks and sent a shockwave through the cartel's ranks. The fire lit up the desert, and for a moment, the night became day. Amid the chaos, Jack attacked with renewed ferocity. He moved like a phantom, his strikes precise and devastating. Emily watched from her hiding spot, her heart pounding as she saw the man she loved become a force of nature. The fight culminated in a showdown between Jack and El Toro. The brute charged at Jack like a bull, his fists swinging with deadly intent. Jack dodged, his movements honed by years of combat. The two clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, each blow echoing like thunder. El Toro had strength, but Jack had endurance and strategy. He used the terrain to his advantage, landing a devastating blow that sent El Toro sprawling. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen rifle and ended the fight with finality. The remaining cartel men, demoralized and leaderless, fled into the night. As the dust settled, Jack returned to Emily, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd never let go. "It's over," he whispered, though the weight of what they'd endured lingered. Together, they walked through the wreckage, past the smoldering vehicles and into the silence of the desert. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon, a fragile promise of a new beginning. Back in the US, Jack and Emily sat on the porch of their home, the same desert stretching before them. Emily's hand rested in Jack's, her grip as firm as his resolve. "Do you think they'll come for us?" she asked softly. Jack stared into the distance, his expression unreadable. If they do, they'll regret it. The camera in Emily's hand clicked, capturing the sunrise. For a moment, it felt like peace. But deep down, Jack knew the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about love, and he'd fight for it as long as he had to. The sun rose higher, and somewhere across the border, whispers of Jack Rivers' name began to spread. A legend born from vengeance, grit, and unyielding love.